I'm Tim Bradner. Welcome to Capital Views. Well, it's a special year this year. For 40 years, we've had the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in operation, and it was 1977 when oil started on the North Slope and the pipeline began transporting oil down to Valdez. I remember in those years, there were a lot of people who felt that the pipeline could not be operated or built safely. There were predictions pretty wild at the time that the pipeline would sink into the permafrost, that it would break, the rupture. We'd have oil flowing all the way down to the Bering Sea. What isn't really widely known is that there are a small group of Alaskans, in fact, engineers and scientists from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who worked with the oil companies to make sure the pipeline could be built safely, particularly in permafrost. So I'm honored to have with us today a special guest, Walt Phillips, geologist who worked on the pipeline in the early days, permafrost expert, one of the Alaskans who worked with the industry to make sure the pipeline could be built safely. Thanks for joining us, Walt.
Well, happy to be here.
Walt, when the oil companies first came to Alaska, they just drew a line in Houston, they drew a line across the state, and they assumed that a pipeline could be built like you could build a pipeline in Nebraska. So what happened? When did they wake up to the reality of the situation?
I think that some of them realized it wouldn't be that simple, but in general, that was the routing was a straight line south from Prudhoe to Livengood and then along the highway as much as possible. But it wasn't a simple job of just throwing the pipe in a ditch like many had hoped it would be. That might have worked south of Tonsina, where there was no permafrost there. It was just the biggest problems in that area was logistics, just getting across the mountains. But as far as the permafrost, dealing with the permafrost, it took a group of us early in the game, when even before TAPS was formed, it became evident that they were going to build a pipeline. And a fellow by the name of Ralph Malachi, who was working for DOT but at the university in their bridge section, began a company along with another engineer, Jim Rooney, from the highway department, and with the idea of offering their services to the oil companies. Once they had a small contract, they started hiring those of us that had some experience in permafrost, and it was kind of tough on the DOT because at least 5 of the first 6 people that they hired were former DOT employees, including me.
And this was a special field. I mean, nobody in those days really knew much about permafrost, at least in the industry.
Well, that's right. I mean, the university had been doing some experimenting, but for the most part, except in the Fairbanks area where the infrastructure often depended on dealing with permafrost, not a lot of folks in the state or anywhere certainly not in the southern states, had spent any time dealing with frost or even aware that it existed beneath the normal seasonal frost that goes a couple of feet into the ground. So it was a whole new ball game. And even the DOT, where I'd worked when we were in permafrost terrain, we drilled to holes and sampled soil down to maybe 20, 25 feet. But we weren't worried about what was under that. And now we're coming along with a large hot pipeline that had the capability of thawing the ground to 50 feet or deeper, so that even in the areas where we had a general idea of what the geology was, we had to do a lot more investigating. Yeah.
So you worked on the crews that actually did the soil borings and determined what the soil composition was and where it could be safely to bury the pipeline,
right,
and where it had to be built above ground.
Right. My involvement with the TAPS project was really in 3 stages. The first was field efforts, and I worked there for a year or so in various portions of the pipeline, sampling the soils and delivering samples to the laboratory and so forth. Then about a year into the into my exposure, it was early in '71. I was asked to go to Houston, Texas, where the TAPS group was putting together their design team. And my role was to act as liaison between the data gatherers and the designers. So I ended up working with the design team then for the next 3 years. And then once in '74, once we got the permission to begin construction in earnest, we moved back to Anchorage, and for the next 3 years I served primarily as a consultant to the pipeline, partly in the field, especially if they ran into an area that was not as predicted soil-wise. We would have to make a quick visit. I lived for several years with a go bag under my desk ready to go immediately.
And Walt, there were also special design features that were built into the pipeline for earthquake protection that were very innovative at the time, that we had never really been done before.
Yes, a lot of the pipeline, as you know, is supported on piling, or VSMs, as we call them, vertical support members, that allow the pipeline to move somewhat with changes in temperature and even with a small earthquake. But at the Denali fault, where we crossed that, we knew that there was the potential for extreme movement. And so in that area, we had a very special design that was done by a large group of engineers that worked it out to allow the pipe to move on rails, basically.
To move sideways.
To move sideways.
Yeah.
And up to 10 or 12 feet of movement is permitted.
It's hard to believe that could be.
Yeah, we gave it a good test a couple of years ago with that when we had the big earthquake.
There was a big earthquake in the Denali Fault in the was it the 90s? But the pipeline, the design worked just as intended.
It worked very well, yes.
Yeah. Well, a lot of examples, there are many examples of that. The first hot oil pipeline built in permafrost, unique contributions by UAF, people like yourself, and the design to keep the pipeline safer. It's a big contribution.
Well, and so far we're pleased that it's working as well as it is.
Yeah, when hopefully we have a lot of time left with this pipeline, another 40 years maybe.
Well, probably as long as the maintenance is performed regularly, it will keep working. Yeah. And certainly the concepts that were developed will be used many times.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Walt, thank you for helping make the pipeline safer and keeping it intact for us. It's brought us a lot of benefits. Thank you, Walt Phillips. Thanks for joining us. And this is Tim Bradner. Thank you for joining the Capital Views.